Hello and good morning, Blue Jays fans. Welcome to what might be one of the most important discussions we're going to have this entire offseason. I'm absolutely fired up to break down why the Toronto Blue Jays need to stay as far away as possible from one particular free agent pitcher. Why team chemistry might be the most underrated factor in building a championship roster. And which exciting young prospect could be the wild card that makes this entire season special. This is going to be a different kind of video than what you're used to from me. But trust me when I say this conversation needs to happen. We're going to dive deep into why certain talented players are absolutely toxic additions regardless of their statistics. Explore the infamous incident that should disqualify one pitcher from ever wearing a Blue Jays uniform. Discuss what made last year's team so special from a chemistry standpoint. And preview an incredibly exciting young arm who could be knocking on the door for a rotation spot very soon. So buckle up because we're about to get real about what it actually takes to build a winning culture. Let's dive right into this because we've got a very important topic to address. For some reason, the sports media has suddenly started pushing this narrative that the Toronto Blue Jays are not done making moves and that they're going to shift their focus to adding another starting pitcher to the rotation. Now, our current situation already has our opening day starter from last season, who was one of our best performers, now projected as our fifth starter behind Jose Barrios and the new additions. That seems a little odd to me, folks. I'm absolutely all for having pitching depth throughout the organization. Every championship team needs quality arms up and down the roster who can step in when injuries inevitably happen. But there's depth, and then there's the kind of depth that doesn't actually make sense from a roster construction standpoint. And my reasoning for being skeptical about these rumors is simple. I genuinely do not think the Blue Jays are really seriously pursuing Framber Valdez, despite what the media keeps suggesting. Now, the Blue Jays did kick the tires on Valdez early in the offseason, right when the season ended and free agency opened up. They called him, they had preliminary discussions. They showed some level of interest in understanding what his market might look like. But obviously, we saw where that situation went, when Toronto pivoted to signing Cody Ponce and trading for Dylan Cease. And by the way, can we just take a moment to appreciate those moves? Chef's kiss on both of those acquisitions because I genuinely think Cease and Ponce are going to be fantastic clubhouse presences and elite performers who keep this rotation moving in the right direction. But back to Framber Valdez, because this is where things get interesting and frankly disturbing. Valdez is reportedly seeking a contract with a $30 million average annual value, and he's already 32 years old. Those two factors alone should be enough to put him completely off the list for anybody. The Blue Jays should want to pursue this offseason, and I'm going to be blunt here. You would have to make an argument to me that I'd rather have Alex Rodriguez or Jose Altuve on this team, and I genuinely hate both those guys more than almost anyone in sports before. I would think it's a good idea to bring Framber Valdez into this clubhouse. Now let me explain why I feel so strongly about this. Because it goes way beyond just stats or money or age. Framber Valdez is famously known for an incident last year that should absolutely disqualify him from being considered a good teammate. And this story is so egregious that it makes my blood boil every time I think about it. For a team like the Blue Jays that's going to be signing players to long-term deals and will have young prospects coming up through the system over the next few years, we're going to see some level of development from guys like Orelvis Martinez and Ricky Tiedemann and others. You cannot bring in veteran players who are going to poison that well. We already have one of the best receiving catchers in all of Major League Baseball in Alejandro Kirk. And the last thing you want is a pitcher who openly disrespects and undermines his catchers. Let me paint the picture of what happened, because if you're not familiar with this story, you need to understand just how bad this was. The Houston Astros were playing the New York Yankees in a crucial game. The bases were loaded, which is obviously a high-pressure situation. Trent Grisham walks into the batter's box, and he's got a favorable count that puts the pitcher in a difficult spot. All of a sudden, you can see the Astros catcher, who's a younger player but from everything I've seen is a pretty good catcher, frantically signaling to Valdez. The catcher is literally shaking his head, waving off the pitch, doing everything possible to communicate. Do not throw this pitch. Bad idea. Shake this off. And what does Framber Valdez do? He completely ignores his catcher. He just continues his pitching motion like nothing's happening. In the midst of his teammate desperately trying to communicate, Valdez literally just keeps throwing. He serves up an absolute meatball right down the heart of home plate. And Trent Grisham proceeds to knock that thing into the Crawford boxes in Houston for a grand slam. Next thing you know, the Yankees are absolutely destroying the Astros, and it's a complete disaster. Now, that's bad enough on its own, right? Your pitcher ignoring your catcher signs and getting lit up is embarrassing? But what happened next is what makes this absolutely unforgivable and reveals the kind of teammate Valdez truly is. The catcher initially thinks nothing of the crossed-up signals, other than being understandably upset that they gave up a grand slam. But Valdez? He was way more than upset. Because on the very next pitch hand, who knows what the actual sign was because of the pitch? Communication system, the catcher ends up wearing a fastball right solid into his chest protector. Folks, that does not happen on a fastball by accident. Any Major League Baseball analyst with a functioning brain would agree with me on this. The catcher clearly thought some kind of off-speed pitch was coming based on whatever signal had been given, and Valdez just reared back and fired a heater right at his own teammate. This wasn't a wild pitch. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional retaliation against his own catcher for daring to try to shake him off earlier. And here's the thing that absolutely killed me and completely sold me on what kind of person Framber Valdez is. After drilling his own catcher in the chest, Valdez just did a U-turn and walked back to the pitching mound without even making eye contact with the young catcher. No apology, no check to see if he's okay, nothing. The young catcher is just sitting there going, "Are you kidding me right now?" While Valdez acts like nothing happened. This looked like an absolute locker room disaster in the making, folks. You could see the dysfunction happening in real time on national television. And here's what's really interesting. From that point forward, there was a little bit of a winning streak for the Astros. But then they completely fell off the face of the planet to end the season. They collapsed spectacularly when they should have been competing for the playoffs. Asterisk. So was there something toxic going on in that Houston locker room? Was Framber Valdez perhaps a significant part of creating that toxic environment? I don't know for certain, but the evidence certainly suggests it's possible. Is he a talented pitcher? Absolutely. I'm not going to deny his skills. But is he worth $30 million per year when you're bringing that kind of attitude and behavior into your clubhouse? Not even close. Not even remotely. Let the Yankees deal with that kind of teammate if they want. Let the Rockies or whoever else wants to take that risk. According to various reports, Valdez has been linked to teams like the Cubs, Phillies, and potentially the Baltimore Orioles. And you know what? There's a very specific reason he's still on the market this deep into the offseason, and I genuinely don't think it's because of his talent or what's been happening with the overall pitcher market. I think it's because there are enough smart front offices around, baseball asking themselves the exact same question. Is this guy going to hurt my locker room? Is he going to undermine our culture? Is he going to create problems with our young catchers and poison our pitching staff? And those are absolutely valid concerns that should make teams think twice about committing massive money to a 32-year-old with character questions. This brings me to what I want to focus on for the remainder of this discussion before we get to our better know. Your 40-man roster segment that we're going to feature at the end of every episode over the next couple of weeks. Team chemistry is, in my opinion, one of the absolute most important factors in building a championship roster. And it's something that often gets overlooked when people just look at stats and WAR and projected performance. I've been in enough dugouts throughout my life. I've played on enough teams. I've been around this game long enough to know what really matters. Just think about your own work environment for a second. When you have that one bad coworker who creates drama, who undermines management, who makes everyone else's job harder, what happens to the overall productivity and morale of the team? Everything suffers. The whole operation becomes less effective because of one toxic personality. The Toronto Blue Jays got all the way to the World Series last year based on many different factors. The talent was obviously there. The pitching was excellent. The hitting came through in key moments. But at the core of everything that made that run special was the fact that they were a genuine team in every sense of the word. Outside of maybe a couple of isolated incidents, and I'm thinking specifically about Jose Barrios and perhaps some headspace issues that might have been caused by front office decisions or contract situations. The Blue Jays were an incredibly unified group. They picked each other up constantly. They had that next man up mentality that championship teams always have. Every single day, players were asking themselves, what can I do to help the team win today? Rather than how can I pad my individual stats? Look at guys like Davis Schneider and Miles Straw, and all these wonderful role players who contributed throughout the season. These weren't superstars putting up MVP numbers. These were players who understood their roles, or embraced being part of something bigger than themselves, and did whatever was asked to help the team win. That's the kind of culture that wins championships, folks. You absolutely cannot bring certain toxic personalities into that equation and expect the chemistry to remain as strong as it was. If you bring in somebody like Framber Valdez, and again, I'm not definitively saying the incident I described earlier represents who he is as a person all the time, but let's say for argument's sake that type of behavior is more the norm rather than a one-time thing. That kind of selfish attitude can be absolutely toxic to a winning culture. Playing for the name on the back of the jersey instead of the name on the front. Being more concerned about your next contract than about winning games. Undermining your teammates publicly, none of that plays well in a locker room like the Blue Jays have built. It's just not going to work, and it would be a disaster waiting to happen. Those are the kinds of stupid, short-sighted moves that wreck teams, that put a poison pill into an otherwise healthy organization, and that you just watch slowly erode everything positive you've built. You've got to be very, very careful when you're adding talent to a team like this current Toronto Blue Jays core, because it absolutely needs to be the right pieces to ensure that we can run this thing back to the World Series and get another legitimate shot at winning it all. You've got to bring in the right people with the right character and the right mindset. It's really as simple as that. If you're building a team and you had the choice of bringing in whoever you'd like, character and cultural fit have to be major considerations alongside talent. You know, if you're trying to hire somebody for your team at work, you don't want to hire somebody who's going to be a giant jerk who comes in bossing everybody around despite being the lowest person on the totem pole. That kind of hire just doesn't work out very well for anybody involved. So, that analogy aside, let's transition to talking about the future, because the Blue Jays are now just 21 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training. But we are getting very, very close to spring training, which means it's time for our Better Know Your Spring roster segment. Today, I want to talk about Ricky Tiedemann, because I think he represents a truly intriguing story for this upcoming spring. Ricky Tiedemann was one of the organization's young rising stars, and we got to see him a couple years ago in spring training where he was absolutely mowing through opposing lineups. I specifically remember him just dominating the Detroit Tigers in exhibition games. This lefty can throw extremely hard with legitimate upper 90s velocity. He's got some genuinely great secondary pitches, including a devastating slider and developing There's just so much to like about Ricky Tiedemann's overall arsenal and potential. Unfortunately, he went down with Tommy John surgery and had to take the entire 2025 season to recover, get stronger, and prepare himself for his next opportunity to contribute at the major league level. But here's the exciting part. Tiedemann comes into this spring training completely healthy. He got hurt back in June of 2024, which means he's now over a full year removed from the surgery. He's built back up his arm strength. He's ready to compete for a roster spot. I genuinely think he could be a revelation this spring. Let's see what this kid can do when given the opportunity. He's only 23 years old, which means he's got his entire career ahead of him. He possesses all these great secondary pitches that should play extremely well at the major league level. Watching him develop this spring is going to be very, very fun. And he legitimately could be the wild card that we're actually looking for to take this Blue Jays rotation to the next level. Tiedemann is currently ranked as the Blue Jays' fourth best prospect in most organizational rankings, and he's been consistently impressive throughout his minor league career up to this point. If you want to talk about player comparisons, he was genuinely on a very similar trajectory to what we've seen from Trey. It wasn't all going to happen in one season, obviously, but Tiedemann was absolutely knocking on the door and getting serious attention from major league evaluators before the injury derailed his progress. Now that he's healthy and has had a full year to recover and strengthen his arm, I'm incredibly excited to see where he picks things up and how quickly he progresses. He's got all the fun tools necessary to be very, very good at baseball. And I'm genuinely confident that he's going to reach his ceiling and become an impact major league pitcher. Tiedemann has been one of the guys I've been extremely high on for years now. And I'm sorry if I'm just gushing with my opinion here, but he truly has elite stuff that could play at the top of a championship rotation. You talk about what the Blue Jays are building for the future, with Trey Yesavage eventually anchoring things alongside Dylan Cease and Cody Ponce in this post-Kevin Gausman era. Yasavage is going to need some help from other young arms. And Ricky Tiedemann is going to be right there, ready to provide that support, along with some other exciting young pitchers that we're going to discuss as we continue covering spring training in because Tiedemann is far from the only intriguing prospect we should be watching. I'm also very excited to see Johnny King this spring and evaluate whether he's everything I've been seeing on video from his time in Dunedin and Vancouver. King had a brief cup of coffee with the organization at the higher minor league levels last year. Now, the reports on his development have been extremely encouraging. He could be another name to watch as a potential surprise contributor. So here's what I want from you as we wrap up this discussion. Hit us up in the comments section and tell us which prospects and young players you're most looking forward to seeing this spring training. We're obviously going to cover all the major storylines and invitees over the coming weeks, and I want to know what you're most excited about. But before we go, let me summarize the key points from today's discussion. The Blue Jays need to absolutely stay away from Framber Valdez, despite his talent, because the character concerns and locker room issues are simply too significant to ignore. $30 million per year for a 32-year-old pitcher with those kinds of red flags is organizational malpractice. Team chemistry and clubhouse culture are absolutely critical factors that often get overlooked in building championship rosters. The Blue Jays have something special going with their current group, and you cannot risk poisoning that well by bringing in the wrong personalities regardless of their statistical production. And finally, there are incredibly exciting young arms like Ricky Tiedemann who could be ready to contribute very soon and represent the future of this organization. Spring training is going to give us our first real look at where these prospects are in their development, and I cannot wait to see them compete. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why character matters just as much as talent, why the Framber Valdez pursuit should be a non-starter, and which young pitcher could surprise everyone this spring, smash that like button right now. Your support means everything and helps this channel continue growing. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to be bringing you daily spring training coverage starting in just 3 weeks. Every storyline, every prospect battle, every roster decision will be covered right here with the depth and passion you've come to expect. Turn on notifications so you're alerted the moment we drop new videos about Tiedemann, Yasavage King, and all the other exciting young players fighting for roster spots. Drop a comment telling me which prospect you're most excited to watch this spring. Share this video with your fellow Blue Jays fans who need to understand why building the right culture is just as important as acquiring talent. Tag them in the comments, send them the link, let's grow this community together. We are 21 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting. Spring training is almost here. The 2026 season is right around the corner. And the Toronto Blue Jays have a legitimate chance to get back to the World Series and finish what they started. I hope you all have a great day. And as always, let's go Blue Jays! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.